Some adopted. Yeah. Now that I learned his last name, nobody said.
Good evening, everyone. It's time for us to get started, and this is a city council meeting. It is Monday, November 6th, 2017. We'll start with a roll call and determination of quorum.
Scott? Drew? Nordstrom? Modrick? Solomon? Lewis? Armstrong? Laurenti? Drury? Roberts? We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll have our invocation by Roger Gallimore, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
One and two. Therefore I exhort, first of all, that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. Let us pray. O gracious God, we praise you and give you thanks for the members of the City Council, our mayor, and all the city staff for their service to this community. We ask that you give them your grace and wisdom this evening as they consider matters on behalf of our community. Bless and keep and strengthen each one, not only during this evening's meeting, but also as they carry out the work of the city each day. I offer this in Jesus Christ. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now on to the adoption of the agenda. This is the time when the council members can adopt the agenda as written or add something to it or make an amendment. Do we have a motion? So moved. Okay, we have a motion by Drew and a second by Modrick for the adoption of the agenda. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And now a couple of recognitions down in front. First up, we have Linda Raby, the president of the Rapid City Area Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. First of all, konnichiwa. We just got back from Japan, the sister city trip, and this was the year that we took the adults there, and it was phenomenal. They do this every other year. The adults go, and in the off year, the children come, and it's been wonderful. Jean and John Matson are usually the representatives from the Nico City, or the Nico City sister city, but they are both home sick with colds, so they send their regards, and we were glad that they stayed home and didn't bring the bugs. We had a wonderful trip to Nico City, and for anybody that has not gone, with whether it's our city council, and I'm encouraging the mayor to go, it's an amazing trip, and they do host families, and it's a unbelievable experience to go over and spend some time in Japan. There was 9 of us that went. We spent time with the Chamber of Commerce and got to visit with them. We spent time with the mayor and the city council, learned a little bit about how they do their city council and their mayoral work. We were able to take a gift from our mayor to their mayor, and he gave me a present to present back to the mayor. Just want to say, the Sister City program is a wonderful program, and Nico City is a very generous and hospitable community. And so if you ever are interested in this, the Sister City organization is very strong, and it's amazing. I was surprised Nico City has a lot of sister cities. I mean, we are just one of many from across the world, which is neat. So anyway, Mayor, I have got this present from their mayor. They wanted me to present it to you. I even got it in the original box. So this is from their mayor to you, and they said thank you very much, and they love the plaque that you sent them.
Oh, nice.
It's a vase, and I don't know what this is. I didn't unwrap it. Maybe it's money, yeah.
Thanks a lot. Okay, now for the recognition of diabetes, or World Diabetes Day, I'd like to have Lauren Dooley and the rest of the group up front. Is this all you could get to come up? Well, I have an executive proclamation to read. Whereas diabetes is a huge and growing burden, 415 million adults are living with diabetes worldwide, and this number is expected to increase to around 642 million, or 1 in 10 adults, by 2040. And whereas in 2017, 30.3 million Americans have diabetes, that is 9.4% of the population. And in 2015, it was found that 9.3% of South Dakotans had been diagnosed with diabetes. And whereas many people live with type 2 diabetes for a long period of time without being aware of their condition, by the time of diagnosis, diabetes complications may already be present. And whereas up to 70% of type 2 diabetes cases can be prevented or delayed by adopting healthier lifestyles. And whereas the theme of World Diabetes Day 2017 is Women and Diabetes, a right to a healthy future, and there are currently over 199 million women worldwide living with diabetes. And women with type 2 diabetes are almost 10 times more likely to have coronary heart disease than women without diabetes. And 1 in 7 births is affected by gestational diabetes. And whereas there are over 215 million men worldwide living with diabetes, and there are over 540,000 children living with type 1 diabetes worldwide, and over 132,000 American children and adolescents younger than 18 years have been diagnosed with diabetes. Now therefore I, Steve Allender, Mayor of Rapid City, do hereby proclaim November 14th, 2017, and the month of November as World Diabetes Day in Rapid City, and encourage everyone to become aware of the importance of screening for, diagnosing, and effectively managing diabetes. And now we will turn it over to Lauren Dooley.
So I have had diabetes for 8 years, and it's hard sometimes, especially going through middle school, with the change of having everybody in new environments and not everybody knowing what it is. But with the all community and knowing how many people that actually have diabetes, it's more heartwarming and welcoming. And I just want to thank you for signing the proclamation, and thank you all for coming.
Okay, let's have a picture up here.
Okay, squeeze it together a little bit. Right here, look here, 2 shots. 1, 2. More. Close to it. Right here. 1, 2.
Okay, thank you everyone for that. And now we will go on to general public comment. There are no general public comment speaker forms, so we will skip that. And go on to non-public hearing items, items 3 through 183, and we'll open up public comment on those items. And dang it. There's a bit of a misprint. We're not going to take items 3 through 183. We'll get to the later items in a minute, but for now, we'll go to item 39, and Lane Johnson would like to speak on item number 39. Is that ready? While you're on your way there, Mr. Johnson, we'll let you and the other speakers know that we'll have 3 minutes, and there's a timer right here so you know when you're getting close.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, councilmen and women, thank you for having me. My name's Lane Johnson. I'm the president of the Great Swimming Club. And the item number 39 is what I'm here to speak to, and only a particular piece of that which speaks to rates within Parks and Recreation proposed for the Rapid City Swim Center. In particular, what affects our swim clubs, and I'm speaking also on behalf of the Rapid City Racer Swim Club. Rates proposed for 2018 are at $8 per hour per lane. That equates to roughly $18,000 a year for our club and a similar amount for Rapid City Racers. That's up about $2,000 from the year previous and also the year previous to that. And this has been recurring now for, if approved, within the last 5 years, an 88% increase. Back in 2013, our rates were around $4.25, and 2017, $7, and now we're looking at $8. This affects our organization. We're a not-for-profit organization. It has an impact on us and our ability to foster and bring up our kids in this swimming community. What we observe and what I'd like to highlight is simply this. Our position is that rates are increasing at a drastic rate and have been going on for too long at this rate. Annually, over the course of these 5 years, that's 13.7% annual increase on rates. Secondly, I'd like to note that the end state of this, although it's not part of this particular proposal, the end state and why the fees are increasing is because Parks and Rec is looking at a national average model, which I too believe is a good foundation to start with. But what I'd like us to do, and I speak here about it because it affects the present, is that that national model is a 50% recovery rate on the facility and the costs associated with that, and also a 12% per hour per lane fee. So that 12%, I think, needs to be looked at critically and adjusted to Rapid City and the region. We've been doing some research to help with Parks and Recs on that costing and going forward, and we have established a relationship that's working with Parks and Rec. But I just wanted to set that forward. So what we're looking at is ideally pausing this rate hike for the lane fees until we can establish really what that end state goal is. My 3 minutes are up.
Yep. Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, now we'll close public comment on those items 3 through 65. And now we have consent items 3 through 65. Would the council like to approve all of these at once or pull any of these items off? We'll go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 39 and 55, please.
Darla Drew.
Item 17 and item 37.
Okay, are there any others? We have a motion to approve by Lewis and a second by Solomon. This motion will be to approve all of the items 3 through 65 with the exception of 17, 37, 39, and 55. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We will go to item number 17, which is to approve change order number 1F to Dakota Barricade LC for 2017 lane line painting, project number 17-2374, for an increase of $6,597.48. Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I pulled this item because I really wanted to talk about what the cost was to just go through and do the lane line painting and also to mark parking spots, how often it's done and how much it costs. So I'd like to ask Dale Tech a couple questions, please.
Okay, please do.
Dale, so we went through this before, but I just think it's really important and I'd like more people to know about it because this is not done in just haphazard way. This is planned and it's budgeted for. So how much do we spend on lane markings and parking markings?
Very good questions. Thank you for asking. Overall, our budget that we spend on pavement markings is about $210,000 a year. This item in front of you tonight is just for the lane line painting, so that's just the stripes going down the street, and that's roughly half that budget, about just a little over $100,000, which equates to about 1.6 million feet of pavement markings that we do by contract. Typically, over the course of the year, we break it up into a spring painting and a fall painting. Every spring, we paint the entire city. All the lane lines that are there get painted regardless if they need it or not, just to brighten things up for the year. And then we also do a fall painting for the high traffic areas. It's a water-based paint, so it's just like your home. You don't paint, or you can't paint your home in the middle of wintertime. The paint will freeze. So we have a window in the spring, all summer, and then in the fall where we can actually apply the pavement markings to the ground when it's not frozen.
So if someone thinks they have a particularly, I don't know, used road that the paint markings are going away on, is there any exceptions for that, or is this just kind of, this is all we can afford, this is what we do?
No, we've got, in our traffic operations group, we've got a couple of people, that's what they're dedicated to. They do the handwork, you see in the downtown core with the yellow curbing, all the stripes, and they're also out looking at the condition of our pavement markings all over town.
So I guess what the lesson here is, if there is problems with the markings and you notice that, probably call the Public Works Department, and you don't have to go to 2 cents. You probably won't get very far with that. So I would just go ahead and call the people that do it. So thank you very much.
Okay, Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may make a motion to approve and hold the floor, if I get a second.
Okay, second by Becky Drury.
Just a follow-up question with Mr. Tech, if I may.
Yes.
Dale, this is a pretty much budget item from the CIP. Am I reading that correctly?
Correct. The lane line painting is actually, no, that is not correct. This is in our operations budget. The lane line painting, as well as the handwork that our crews self-perform, are all in our operations budget.
And that comes from traffic?
Correct.
Thank you. I yield.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor for approval. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now on to item 37. Item 37, acknowledge September 2017 General Fund Cash Balance Report. And we'll go back to Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to go to Pauline Sumption, our finance officer, and see if I can get a cash balance report from her so we can kind of keep track of what's going on in our spending. Maybe not? Well, what's our fund cash balance? General fund cash balance, excuse me.
Sorry, I'm pulling it up.
Okay.
At the end of September, the cash balance in the general fund was $5,130,932.83.
Is that kind of in line with what we've had over the last few years?
It's a little bit lower than normal, but we've only received one sales tax payment in September again. We'll have 3 in October.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That answers my question.
Okay, all right. Motion to approve by Nordstrom. Second by Solomon. All in favor of approval of item 37, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now on to item 39. Approve resolution number 2017-104, a resolution amending certain fees to be charged in 2018 for various licensings, permits, and applications. We'll go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you. I see Doug Lowe is making his way to the podium. Before I get to you, Doug, I guess one thing that concerns me on the entire fee schedule, which, you know, we do have to adjust fees from time to time, but I'm uncomfortable making the adjustments without justification and explanation, which the entire Parks and Rec fee schedule, and some of them probably are very justified, I'm sure, but they're just there for us just to take in. So my request, I suppose, for the future is when we do these fee adjustments each year or whenever or quarterly, that included in the agenda item is just a written justification of, hey, here's why the golf needs to increase, here's why Parks rentals need to increase and so on. And that's probably true for all departments as well. But just having justification is really helpful for us, because otherwise we don't know why. And so when folks have questions, it'd be nice to answer that. And we could ask you about everything up here, but it'd be a lot more efficient just to read that. And so just for future reference, if you could please include that, that would be very helpful. So we had good questions tonight from the swim team about the adjustments in their rates for lane usage and how that's been increasing over the last several years, and this rate increase as well, leading to another $2,000 for their team. So I guess, can you explain how this national average rate increase works and how it's adjusted for our market?
Okay. Good evening, by the way. First of all, when this process started about 6 or 7 years ago, when it was $4 an hour, just to preference everything with this, the swim teams also had to buy a youth pass, for a yearly pass with that $4 an hour. So with the requirement of the $4 an hour lane, they also had to buy a youth season pass. So that is kind of where it's kind of misleading that there's been a large increase over the last 4 or 5 years, because they used to have to buy a yearly pass with their membership or with their rate for their team. So I just wanted to preference that with that. The national average is something that we've researched and we use along with all our regional and state information that we get from the state to come out with some of our pricing. Along with golf and everything else, we look at regional, local, state, national averages to kind of come up with where we want to be. We also use that to allow for where we want to be as a park and rec department in each one of our divisions, where our subsidy level wants to be, where is acceptable. And the national average for aquatics is 50%. So we always try and stay in there where we're going to get enough revenues to cover at least 50% of our costs. One of the things that Mr. Johnson said, the 12% was a national average. He actually meant $12 an hour, not 12%. So it's $12 an hour is the rate for lane usage across the nation. So we are right now 33% below that average, and yes, it does take into consideration large cities on the East Coast, West Coast, everywhere. But we also do research along with the state, different areas, different parks and recreation divisions within the state, and get what they charge. And so we average that all out too, and look at those. And from the $7 up to $8, that's kind of right in the middle of the range for the state of South Dakota too.
If I can just direct a quick question from my time to Rod Seals, Chief Seals. Just on your fee increase, is the per mile per transport is from $11.83 to $13.50. Is that for gasoline increases? What's that adjustment?
It was really, we took a look at the whole area, our region, and also what Medicare reimburses, and realized we were well below where we needed to be. Okay. And so it was just bringing it up to that, where that standard is across for our region and for Medicare reimbursement.
Same thing for the stretcher fee?
Exact same thing.
Okay, and I don't know if Dale Tech or somebody can answer for the air quality fee. We have an increase in that permit as well, from $75 to $150 for the construction permit for under 5 acres, and $100 to $200 per permit for over 5 acres. What's the justification on that one?
Yes, we, and of course I wasn't here during that time, but 2 years ago there was a study performed on the effort that it took for staff to be involved with the review and the permitting of these, and there was a recommendation at that time that those fees be increased. For one reason or another, it was not brought forward for official review. When we looked at it recently, we determined it was well past due. So Just
Okay. And the finance one is an adjustment for our TNC ordinance, which we're talking about tonight, so I want to ask a question about that on the fees. But I just wanted just a little more justification of some of the fees, and I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
Okay, John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Doug, while you're standing there, if I remember right, 6 years ago when we were talking about fees at the swim center, you guys came in and asked for a really large rate increase at that time. And I believe the council asked you to spread it out over a number of years. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
So, because I know at that point we were trying to get it up, like you said, to that 50%, and you know, that's something that we really have to work hard at doing, because not everybody in Rapid City uses a swim center. But 50% of that's being funded by the taxpayers' dollars. So anyway, thank you, Doug.
Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's a good investment to have funds go towards activities and recreation, to include our kids and our swimming events. It gives them a direction and maybe keeps them off the streets and gives them a great activity winter, spring, summer, and fall. I do have some concerns with the rates. I will tell you that this rate increase has been difficult to read. I might direct this with Jeff, but and I don't know who does the form, but you know, you really had to cut and paste to see what the rate was and then find it below with the above, and you know, you had to make your own spreadsheet on this so that you could line up what our differences in our spreadsheets are, and the others didn't do that. They just showed what it was and then what the request is now. So that's complicated in itself, and it's daunting. It'd be nice to really have it clean. It's black, and this is how much it is today, and it's red, and this is how much you want. And then that justification, I believe that Alderman Solomon had stated, it's critical to any time we're looking at fees and charges. And one of the things we've really disciplined ourselves in well in these current increases that we've had come before us is there's been a lot of presentations, documentations, task force, lots of information to justify the decision we need to make. But this one was rather tough because it didn't state if it was a cost of living, or I didn't know about the history. I didn't know the historic value of a big increase done 6 years ago and then something gradual to come. And if it's so, I mean, our swim teams, those are our recreational teams that we need to have partnerships with, and it would be great if they were aware ahead of time so that they're budgeting, because I believe the factor you told me was about $2,000 increase on the team in order to proceed forward for the new season. And you know, it breaks down per day pretty low, but when you look at the big dollar amount, it looks rather high, and then trying to figure out why. I mean, the water is still there, there's just not a body in it. So why does it have to increase at such a high level when we're heating the building and we're heating the water and we've got the lines in there, when maybe this is a really good exercise for our students and our children and also our adults to be able to have it affordable for all, and so that they can also be a participate in the team as well. So I do have the concern of this adjustment. It sounds like you've got a relationship with the swim team, which was great. A statement was made that that factor was an important part of it. That would help us too in some of our documentation, is that discussion factor that you have. But pausing the lane fees maybe would not be such a hardship, and maybe that's a good recommendation. With minute 55, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. As Lane mentioned, we are starting to develop a really good relationship with the swim teams, and I think that that's going to be positive moving forward. They've also shared with us when their budget season starts. It's a different budget cycle than the city is on, so we told them that we'd work with them so that before their budget time, we'd work with them for any increases that they could incorporate into their annual budget. So I think we've got a really good working relationship with them. Also, I think that we are being very measured in our increases and knowing that they can be a hardship on some people. That's why We did not raise the daily rates for individuals using the pools or the ice arena. We kept those at the same rates as last year. But we do look at all of our rates every year, and we have to take into consideration increases in operating costs, and we want to try to maintain that the national standard of a 50% rate of recovery for swim and 55 to 60% cost recovery in ice and recreation, and so we're working on it.
So remind me then, where are we at right now with our goal being at 50%? Where are we falling?
This year we were
47.
47.
So we're darn close.
Yes.
And is it necessary to have this increase on these lanes at this time? Having a $1 increase if we're at 47%?
Well, it's part of our annual assessment of the revenue increases that we're looking at. Certainly up to you guys. If you would rather us not do that, that's entirely up to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Becky Drury.
Thank you, Mayor. Since we're talking about water, and I don't have questions for you, I'm going back to the water rates and the reclamation fees that are going up 43%. And again, I'm going to... Are we on?
We're on item 39, the rates and fees for other than water and sewer.
Oh, so sorry.
It's all right.
I yield.
Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in reference to the recovery rates of the pool, I would just like to tell everybody out there that's on these swim teams, one of the things I plan on working on, and I've been talking to some people and trying to get forward, is bring forth a cover for the 50-meter pool, which would make that viable to be used all year round, and it would make it the only 50-meter pool on the west side of the state, and it actually would have an economic impact in helping recovery rates of the pools, which pools currently cost us, I think, roughly $680,000 a year. Is that about right?
Right.
And maybe a little more. Our recovery rate's horrible on them because they're only open for 2.5, 3 months maximum. So anything we can do to maximize our return on those things, like putting a cover on the pool, or perhaps building the field house that we should have built a long time ago, which had a recovery rate somewhere in the 70s, I heard 79%, something like that, would help maybe alleviate some of these issues. To start with, we wouldn't have to raise our rates as much if we could get some more money flowing in the door and some more customers. So I'd like to assure that the swim team, even though I'm going to vote for this, I do want you to understand that part of my rationale behind that is I do want you, we're trying to move forward and hopefully bring that project forth in the future here to be able to use that pool all year round as was intended originally. And and as a general public, obviously everything goes up, and this is part of the reason I voted for the CPI as well, and I'll be voting for the water rate increases because we have to budget for increases as they come, or things that might happen, and there's no other way to raise money, unfortunately. We can't do it any other way. And we are funding a swimming pool as taxpayers, but we've got to try to do our best to pass it on to the users as well, and that's probably the easiest way without raising tax on everybody. So thank you.
Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. As the swim teams are non-profit, not-for-profit groups, it is their privilege to raise money and to ask for donations. It's something our government gives those 501c3 organizations. I don't know, maybe you already raised money for your group, but I've raised thousands of dollars for children's projects over the years. I'm a fundraiser. And I would ask that you look into, doing some crowd raising, some crowdsourced fundraising. I think you could get the money from people that would want to see these teams go on. And $2,000, frankly, is not that hard to raise. So I think that you might want to look at some of those options. And I'm also going to support this fee increase. Thank you.
Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to chime in real quick. For me, this is really about not raising the fees on any particular groups. What we're really choosing here on the council is who's going to pay for it. We can't debate and argue about the facilities. They're there. They need to be supported. The people, those buildings are there. So we're past that. The fact of the matter is we're trying to decide who's going to pay for it. Are the users going to pay for it by the fees? And like we've heard the department speak, they're paying for just roughly less than half of the cost to those facilities. So if we don't raise the fees, then what we're really doing is raising the cost on the rest of the taxpayers because the subsidy gets larger. So that's what we're really talking about. So are we going to charge the users, or are we going to pass the greater cost on to the rest of the taxpayers? I support having the users bear 47% of that cost. If it gets us closer to 50, I think that's better. The taxpayers are still paying for 50% of the operation. So I would encourage my colleagues to support the agenda item. Thank you.
Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a point of clarification to Alderwoman Drury. I'm the one that made the recommendation from the Legal and Finance Committee meeting that she go ahead and talk about the water rates on this one because the water rates are included in this resolution. But if you'd rather have her talk on item 66, that's the one she pulled during Legal and Finance. So I'm just chiming in to let you know, Mayor. Sorry, Alderwoman Drury, I made that recommendation. You can have your say at 66 instead.
Fine, that's fine.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. If I may make a motion to approve this resolution with the exception of the Rapid City Swim Center rental and delay that one for 2 weeks to the next council meeting. And if I get a second, I'll explain further.
Okay, we have a second by Modrick.
My reasons is to adopt the entire resolution except for the swim center portion of it, because I understand that there's a lot of miscommunication or misunderstanding from and between the Parks and Recreation Department and also the swim teams, plural, both teams. So I'd like to have them get a chance to have that conversation to clarify why we need to do the rates increases. And Doug, just a quick question. Just a clarification of our conversation earlier is that my understanding is that you had a pretty good understanding from the swim teams about this rate increase. So I'm just confused about the misunderstanding or miscommunication about this.
Yeah, we had a meeting last Friday, actually, with the presidents of both the racers and the great swim team to go over this fee structure. And when we left, we had, I thought, a pretty clear understanding of what was going on and how we were going to attack it over the next couple of years and include them in the process of helping us understand their needs and our needs and kind of work together on things. So,
if I can stop you right there for a second, that part I generally understand, but what we were getting is phone calls and emails about this rate increase, not understanding what that is. So that's the reason why I'm going to support you in the long run, but I need to give you a chance to explain it to the swim teams so that they totally understand why the rate increase is. And then Alderwoman Drew made a good suggestion about raising the nonprofits being able to raise some funds. So I just want to give them a chance to have another opportunity to have that discussion with you, because I believe very strongly that there is a lot of misunderstanding on this water rates. So that's the reason for my motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Excuse me? Lisa's out of time. Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a substitute motion, and that's to approve item number 39 as presented before the council tonight.
Okay, we have a second by Chad Lewis to that substitute motion. Any further discussion on this item? All right, the motion on the floor is for approval of item 39. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, motion passes with 2 noes. All right, thank you. Now on to item 55, which is to approve capital improvements contingency funds in the amount of $275,000 for the West Memorial Park project. And go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I can direct a question to our Public Works Director.
Yes.
Dale, can you can you explain the rationale for dipping into this contingency for 275?
I hope I can. As I understand the West Memorial Park project, multiple funding sources involved. The final investigation that they did included a stormwater outfall and stormwater quality improvements. As they were assessing the condition of the existing stormwater pipe, I believe that runs down Mount Rushmore Road and ultimately dumps into Rapid Creek, it was in very poor condition. So poor that trying to tie into it to divert the water is probably not an option for stormwater quality. So the additional $275,000 being requested out of CIP contingency would be to more or less replace that damaged, or I should say end of its useful life stormwater pipe to a different location so that it's functional again.
Okay. One of the reasons why I wanted to bring that up is because the Parks and Rec line item on that was $275, and I wasn't sure if it was one and the same, if something else was going on, but I'm sure that's just replacing the sod and everything else around that we're ripping up. So with that, I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Mayor. If I will, if I may, I would like to speak with Dale Tech as well.
Please do.
Thank you. Mr. Tech, excuse my ignorance, but I just want to ask the question anyway, and then I'll be less ignorant, hopefully. The question is, why can we not use the drainage utility for something like this rather than the CIP contingency fund?
The stormwater drainage fee has its own 5-year plan, and there's no additional funds left in it. The monies that we believe to be collected are already spent for the next 5 years, at least budgeted. It's not unusual to include stormwater or storm pipe in regular capital improvements. Most streets have miles and miles of storm pipe underneath it that are funded both with the CIP and partially with the stormwater fee as well.
Okay, so 100% of the drainage fee is committed for the next 5 years?
Correct.
Very good, thank you.
Darla Drew.
I move to approve.
Second. Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second by Richie Nordstrom. All in favor of approval of item 55, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And that takes us through consent items, and now on to non-consent items 66 through 183. We'll open public comment on those items. We have a few speaker request forms, starting with Holly LeMay.
Good evening, everybody, and I want to say thank you to those of you who responded to my email, and I'm disappointed to the ones that didn't, but hopefully you'll hear me out now. I just want to speak on behalf of people on a fixed income in relation to the water rate increases. I believe 43% is somewhat outrageous, even though it's spread out over a 5-year period. I think that it's going to have a tremendous impact on people that their incomes don't go up at that rate, and decisions have to be made on people's budgets, what they're going to give up and what they're not. And I think it's really important that you recognize the hardship that can create, especially when it relates to property values for those of us that have to water our lawns because we live off the West Boulevard area and we want our neighborhood to look nice. It's going to affect the overall atmosphere of the neighborhood when you start seeing people that can't water their lawns anymore because of this increase. The suggestions have been made to get sprinkler systems installed and that kind of thing, but I think for people in a fixed income, that's quite unrealistic. And I'd also like to say that there was the recommendation made to look at the requirements for assistance from the city. And I looked at those, and I believe that the people qualified for the assistance a lot of times would, based on those recommendations and requirements, we require someone at the poverty level to be able to be eligible. So anyway, I appreciate you hearing my comments, and hope you take it into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now on 66 and 67, Tonchi Weaver.
Good evening. I would like to say ditto to what Holly said, but I'm here because mainly of the final whereases on both 6201 and 6202. The final whereas, the Common Council desires to set the appropriate rates, fees, and charges as recommended by the rate study by resolution. Those are the words I have a problem with. Because an ordinance, in your own policies and procedures, there's a distinction between ordinances and resolutions. And an ordinance has a little higher threshold. There are 2 readings. There's only 1 for a resolution. A resolution is subject to the whims of a council. You have 2 readings with an ordinance, and an ordinance has the force of law. I left my paper up there, but I would suggest that this is not the right way to govern. I'm going to read just briefly from the description of an ordinance. The word ordinance in this title shall mean a permanent legislative act of the governing body of a municipality within the limits, thank you, Tina, of its power. The word resolution is used in this title shall mean any determination, decision, or direction of the governing body of a municipality of a special or temporary character for the purpose, etc. You can read the rest of that sentence. But water utilities are not special, out of the ordinary, or temporary. And I think that it's actually kind of sneaky to want to do these rate adjustments through resolutions. For one thing, they can be done as often as you want. That way, there's not a lot of warning. And even though a resolution is referable, as is an ordinance, in this case, it is hard to catch. And when you have 2 readings, there's time for thorough debate. And I believe that our water and sewer utilities should be governed by ordinances. And I would suggest that if you want to make an adjustment to 9-19-16 in this document, fine. But there's another feature of a resolution as opposed to an ordinance that is troubling as well. The law is really silent whether or not the resolution has to be approved by all members, a majority of all members of the council, or just those present. So I just want to tell you that when you pass these 2 this evening, if you do, we are ready with petitions. Thank you.
Okay, on the same items, now Tina Mullally.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for the services that you do for us. However, on this particular issue, I gotta say ditto on what Holly said, because anybody on a fixed income, $3 may not mean a whole lot to you, but $3 to somebody on a fixed income could mean their prescription pills. Then I want to do a double ditto on what Tanchi had to say. You follow your own rules. You got rules and policies and you're not following them. And on my own accord, I hear from this board constantly, we need affordable housing, we need affordable housing. Well, I'm trying to build affordable housing. And I'm trying to build affordable housing in a disturbed neighborhood, North Rapid. Okay, it's a depressed neighborhood. I'm trying to build in there. When the permits to hook up a water and a sewage for a building I want to build is $1,100 in permits alone, now you want to raise the water rates? I'm going to have to turn around and issue rent rates higher on my tenants because water rates are going up. You know, they can't afford it any more than I can afford it. Everybody goes into business with the understanding of being able to pull a profit. That's what business does. That's what capitalism is, so that you can build a profit and move on from there. You know, but you're making it more difficult. When I set a standard of how much profit I want to make, and then you come in with fees and permits and regulations and other things that cost me not to be able to continue my profit, and I have to pass it on to people who can't really afford their own house, and they have to rent from someone like me, which I am not a slumlord. I'm willing to put money into my properties. But every time I turn around, I'm having to pay the city a little bit more. And because I don't live inside the city limits, I don't have a vote. You have the vote for me. I only own property in the city. I can't vote in the city because I don't live here. And I'd say something else, but I better keep my mouth shut on that one because talking about it. But I do want you to think outside the box. There are other ways, Mr. Lewis, to raise money. You know, taxes are not everything. Fees are not everything. You know, we've got Sturgis. We've got Mount Rushmore. We've got Crazy Horse. We've got all these tourists. Why don't we let them pay for some of the uses that they use? You know? There are other ways to make money. Start thinking outside the box. Thank you for your time.
Okay, that takes us through our public comment period on 66 through 83. Now we'll go to ordinances, item number 66. Second reading, ordinance 6201, an ordinance to revise the rates, fees, and charges for the city's water utility by amending Chapter 13.08 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. We'll go to Becky Drury.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe I'm on the right number this time. Thanks for your patience. I've reiterated this a couple times about the fee increases, the 43%, and I'm just going to say it one more time. I think 43% over 5 years is an awful increase for our constituents. Even at a 4% raise, we would be able to pull this off if we just took a little bit longer to build the reserves. I believe we all should have reserves. That's just good economic business. Families should have reserves. Businesses should have reserves, and so should the city. However, I think we could build them up slower. Talked to an economist. He said, she said, reserves are usually built over a 10 to 15 year time frame, not 5. So I still don't understand why we have to do it within 5 years. And I know people say it's only a couple dollars, but by the time we do a couple dollars here and a couple dollars there, it all adds up. If you've ever had a teenager, you know that a couple dollars here and a couple dollars there. But yeah, smile, because by the end of the year, they have nickel and dimed you more than you ever really understand that you've given out. And I appreciate the comments of the people that were here earlier. I have sent out the senior citizen, application to people so they can fill it out, but if you're on the edge, you might not make it, you might not qualify, and most people don't get an 8% increase per year to cover expenses. We're lucky if you get a 4% increase per year. I mean, this is just high for me. I guess I'm just going to continue to say no, because I think it's too much, too fast, and we should build our reserves, yes, but over a longer time frame. I yield.
Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. May I ask Joel Landina a question?
Yes.
Joel, to give us the perspective comment on what Tanchi Weaver said about resolution versus ordinance, and I was trying to dig around. Was this on ordinance at one point, and then we moved it to resolution, and maybe you can give me the history and why we are in resolution now, just to counter-discuss this, if we could.
Well, and I don't know that I can completely answer all that. I think
you're probably aware, you had the fee resolution earlier this evening, that when we had fees, many of them were established in ordinance. Some were by policy. Unfortunately, sometimes resolutions would get lost if you had a fee on just a random resolution. So we combined all the city fees and charges onto a single resolution so that they would all be in one place and easy to find. And then there frankly probably was some thought, I'm trying to remember the discussion when we discussed the fee ordinance, but that, you know, for instance, with the water fees, it's been 5 years since they've been increased. And that when you have to go in and do 2 readings and change the ordinance every time you change a fee for everything, that makes it does make it more difficult, and that there was an effort to try to have the fees catch up so you don't have to keep having these big jumps, that we can look at the fee resolution annually and adjust appropriately annually versus getting these situations where we don't raise fees at all for 5 years and then you look at the math and you have to make a big jump. I would say there used to be, at least for sewer, there used to be a provision that required that they be set by ordinance, and several years ago the legislature went in and changed that so they can be set by resolution. So there's certainly nothing illegal about setting them by resolution. Whether or not you think it's a good idea or it's good policy, that's ultimately up to the 10 of you.
So when we go forward, if this ordinance does pass in resolution form, which is setting us out for 5 years, so 2022, can a future council, say a new one that comes in 2019, change what we have set since it's in resolution form, even though we're putting it out there in a plan of 5 years?
Sure. I didn't draft the ordinance, so I mean, if it's inconsistent with the ordinance, you may have to amend the ordinance, but you could always amend the ordinance. If it's not required to stay that way in the ordinance, then you would have the ability to adjust it higher or lower, I would think, in the resolution when you adopt the annual resolution.
And yet in our plan, in the water plan that we've had provided for us in presentation, that plan actually puts us out 5 years to create the funding that we need for some pretty big projects in about 4 years from now. So that could be fuzzy math if this got changed halfway in.
Sure. If it was changed and it altered the revenue that you collected, then you would likely have to go in and change your capital plan and probably remove some items.
Have I missed anything? Thank you, Mayor.
John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been interesting, to say the least. I've had a lot of people that have contacted me on this. You know, a couple of years ago when we were talking about our sewer rates, and at that time, I think most people know that I'm pretty fiscally conservative. At that time, I had recommended that we increase our sewer rates 2 years ago. No traction on it whatsoever because we knew we were coming down the line to this. Now, if we'd just raised a couple of percent a couple of years ago, I think it would have helped tremendously. And if we'd have done that with the water too, it would have helped tremendously. I can't support this big of a jump this quickly. I think we could spread it out over 10 years or 15 years like my councilwoman sitting next to me said. It does concern me that we're doing an ordinance for a resolution because the way it's set up, you know, 2 years from now, it could decrease or it could increase. You know, we don't know what's going to happen, you know, in the future. It does make it a little bit easier to do it that way. I do agree with that. But, you know, we as a council have to look at how we budget our money, we spend our money, and how we look into the future with our money. And it isn't good policy anywhere in business to not build in some kind of an increase over the years. You know, even if we're building in a 0.5% increase for cost of living or whatever it is, we should be building in some kind of an increase and not taking it all at once. But one of the things I find really interesting about this is we're talking about a 40+% increase, and then we look at here, because we're talking about you know, giving the disabled and the poor and the elderly a break. But, you know, in this ordinance, they only get a 20% decrease. So, you know, even if we raise it 40%, they're getting increased also, and it's going to be very hard on them. So I can't support this. I didn't support it. I won't support it. I think there's better ways that we can do it, and I'll keep talking about the Vision Fund and taking more of that money any chance I get. So anyway, thank you.
Chad Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Mr. Dale Tech, if that's possible.
Yes.
Mr. Tech, could you please explain to me the situation currently at the Mountain View water treatment plant, as far as how's that facility holding up right now?
The Mountain View water treatment plant was built in the 1960s, and an addition was put on in the 1970s. I would classify it today as functionally obsolete. It still works, but the parts necessary to repair it when it breaks down are not available anymore. We've got to scour the country and industrial salvage yards to find pieces to keep it running. We've been blessed by a couple of wet years here in the past where we have not needed it much, except for what I call peaking capacity in the very dry months of the summer when people tend to water their lawns. We fired it up this year and had it operational. We can keep it limping along, but there's going to be a point where it will be unserviceable.
Thanks, sir. May I ask a question of Pauline Sumption of Finance?
Yes.
Ms. Sumption, as far as the, I was looking at my water bill, and there's about $11.25 roughly for Jackson Springs charge. Could you explain that to me?
Sure. Back in 2009, the city took out a $49.1 million bond issue. As part of the bond issue, we established surcharges to the water bill to pay off that debt. So that is going to be there until 2039, I believe, is the date on there. But yeah, so we have to use that to pay off the debt.
So is it fair to say that that could have maybe been a little bit budgeted for by increasing along the way if we had a chance to do so? Or a little more?
In my opinion, yes.
Okay, well, I figured it out, and I'm roughly paying $7 a month for water, so it comes up about 160% increase on my water bill, if I had done that math. But so the idea being here, folks, is we're not just raising rates because we want to, or we want to go out and take as much money as we can. This is part of responsible government. You have to pay for things when you do this, and we don't have any other way to raise money. You might cut services. We want the same services, but you don't want us to increase our revenue. How are we supposed to do that? We have very few ways to do that. This is a fee service, so only the users are getting charged for it, and people that actually use the water are getting charged for it. And we have to do it. For whatever reason, it didn't get done in the past. It should have been done, but there's a lot of finger pointing can go on. But the fact of the matter is, here we are. We have to do something to budget for the future for things like the Mountain View water facility that's going to, obviously we've just been told it's barely functioning, and we're going to have to do something about that in the future. And unless you want another $11 increase on your bill, like I just got, or not just get, but I have, and you probably have too, we have to function, we have to budget for it now. It's not something we sit up here and do just so we want to destroy business or whatever. I'm obviously the most pro-business person up here, I think, and I'm definitely pro-affordable housing, as I've had several discussions about that up here on several occasions, but for everything I can for affordable housing. And this is just one of those situations where you have to bite the bullet and you have to do the responsible thing. No one wants to do it, but it has to be done. And as far as the rest of this goes, it's governing. It's part of being honest with you and telling you the truth. I could sit here and say, oh no, I'm voting against this, I'm not going to do it. That's the easiest thing you can do in this position, is just to say no. But for to actually step up and vote for it is a hard thing to do, and I'm more than happy to do it.
Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. And it's been a great discussion on the water for the Parks and Rec, as well as this for the water rates. There was a very extensive study done by our staff to come up with these rates. And if you remember from the presentation, they basically just took at the level of reserves that we want plus the operating costs. And then they took a look at our fee structure, or for our customer base. And they basically, for an enterprise fund, it has to support itself. So there was a lot of great points that were brought up here, and I understand that we all want to just pay our share for our water bill, whether we're residential, commercial, industrial, or whatever. But I have raised questions in the past, and so I just want to put this on record, because I've mentioned it before, that there is some organizations, and it's primarily the city itself, that actually gets free water. They're not metered, they don't pay the water because they're a city entity. It's a little concerning to me because if you don't meter it and track it, how can you really evaluate what subsidy you're making on it? So there are some city departments that don't get metered and don't pay for water. I've asked staff over the years, you know, roughly what is that? It's concerning to me they can't answer that because it's not metered and paid for. So if you don't track it, you really can't get a really good answer. The most recent answer I was given was that it's about $1.4 million. So if you take a look at the interdepartmental charges and PELTs that the water fund pays, the general fund, so the PELT is a payment in lieu of tax. And basically, enterprise funds pay this. It's basically the value of their property times the mill levy, and it's supposed to be the same as a business. Businesses get charged property tax, and that's supposed to pay for services like fire and police and streets, that type of stuff. So the Water Enterprise Fund does pay a PELT, a payment in lieu of tax. They also get charged for interdepartmental charges. And the interdepartmental charges are those services in the general fund, such as the streets and the human resources department and the attorney's office and the finance office, fire and street, or not fire, human resources, finance, I think I covered them, IT. Those are services that the other city departments provide to the water department, so they pay for them. I find it a little concerning that the water department has a product that they sell that other city departments don't pay back. So if you just take a look at the total of the PELT and the interdepartmental charges of $700,000, and if staff's estimate, and remember it's just an estimate because they don't know, that really if they charged out all the other city departments it would be $1.4 million. The city water enterprise fund would actually collect an additional $700,000, and that might actually reduce our rates or allow us to build those reserves faster so that we could modify the resolution and not have to go 5 years with these rate increases. So with all that said, because these are the questions I've been asking for years, and really I don't think I've ever gotten much traction from my peers up here to really take a look at this or direct staff to really kind of find out which departments are paying for water, which departments are not paying for water, what city council made that decision, and maybe it's time the city council took a look at that and at least put some understanding as far as why we do that. You know, if we're watering the soccer fields or if the fire department's not paying water but they're washing down their fire trucks, we need the equipment clean. It needs to be in good working order. But I think the city council should be aware of whether we're going to subsidize that. It's no different than the water department, Mr. Jeff Biegler, who was saying, we're trying to get 50% revenue out of our swimming pools because then it's only being subsidized from the general fund, the taxpayers, 50%. Well, somebody has to pay. I think that's what Alderman Laurenti was saying. So whether it's being paid in sales tax, which I think someone brought up, why not let our tourists pay for that? They do contribute sales tax when they come through Rapid City. The rest of us who live in Rapid City pay property tax, or if you own property, you're paying property tax. And then we have these fees, or these user fees. So for our water, it does slightly go outside of our city limits, but it's anybody who gets water from the city of Rapid City, and you are going to be included in that rate study. So I'm running out of time here, and my mouth's getting dry. So I'll just summarize by saying, you know, one of the questions, when you put on that thread, it can unravel a lot of things, because this building, not only does the city offices are in this building, but the school offices are in this building. So when you think about that the city departments don't pay water, is this building one of them? Because then is there a separate meter for the school? Is the school paying water for this building, or does the school skate free on this building? If the school skates free on this building, does the school pay for any of the water, or are they part of that free water service? It's just, I'd like to tug on that string. Staff has recommended that they're willing to work on this, but they've also admitted it will take a lot of time. I am out of time, but I would encourage my city council members to, if you really want to understand city finance, you have to take a look at the whole picture, not just one little fund at a time. Thank you. I'll yield.
Yield what?
A millisecond.
We'll go to Richie Nordstrom.
Okay, Mayor, I'll take the bullet here on this and move to approve the second reading of the ordinance. And if I get a second, I'll...
Second.
Second by Scott. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Dan, are you ready for slides 11, 12, and page 13? Have you got those available for us? I think what you got here in the previous presentation explains the reasons why we need to do this. Have you got those available?
Yes, I do. Is it okay to bring them up and,
if I may,
as a talking point?
If I may. Dan, what I'm looking at is primarily at this point, I'm looking at slide page 11. And we'll get into the sewer rates in a moment, but essentially what I'm looking at is two line items up there. That dotted line and then the orange line. And what we need to do is number one, separate out the utility rate relief application, plus separate that from this line item first. So if you can kind of give us a general outline of, and very briefly, what those two lines represent, and then the purple lines up on top.
This is a slide from the public presentations that we gave during October. What you're looking at, the blue portion of each of these columns is our operations and maintenance requirements. The red portion is debt service. The green portion is rate-funded capital. And then the purple part is not reserve balance, but is the transfer to or from the reserves. So the orange line that goes across the top is the proposed total revenue that we see is needed to be collected over the next 5 years to keep the water and water reclamation enterprise funds viable. And then the black dotted line is if no rate increases are provided for, that is the revenue that would be generated. And so at some point in time, within a couple, 1 to 2 years, we have to start making some decisions on where are we going to cut. And it's not just cutting the amount of money that goes into the reserves, it's also reducing the capital improvement
Mr. Kuhn, if I can stop you there, right there. And I know you haven't got the data on any of your slides here, but the previous 5 years, I want to really emphasize that we did not do any increases during those previous 5 years. Am I saying that correctly?
Correct.
There was no increases during those previous 5 years because of action or inaction of the previous council. Am I saying that correctly?
The last rate increase was January 2013.
I think that's very important. I think that is very important. That's one of the reasons why we need to move forward on this. And that dotted line represents to me, everything above that dotted line will be representing what the shortfall is if we cannot move forward on this. Because I tried to emphasize to a lot of people that Mountain View water treatment plant is going to be needed in a very short period of time, and that's all relative. But as Mr. Tech already stated, is that most of that operation cannot find the parts for that, and we cannot actually really safely operate that facility right now at its current condition. Am I stating that correctly?
Yes, the Mountain View Water Treatment Plant has reached the end of its useful life, is how we state it in engineering.
And for me, and I apologize for taking so long on this, but that's the important critical factor, is if we don't have adequate water supply above that dotted line, we aren't going to provide a good quality, safe product to the citizens of Rapid City. That's the reason why I'm supporting this. Thank you, Mayor. I'll yield.
John Roberts for 230.
Is that all I got? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to thank Councilwoman Scott for bringing up what she brought up. 6 years ago, we did a water study, not a rate study, but a water study looking at where a lot of the so-called free water was going, whether it was parks, whether it was baseball fields, soccer fields, different areas. At that time, roughly it was $1 million a year that the taxpayers were paying for through the rates that was being given away. So that number absolutely has to be a lot higher now. At that time, I'd spoken with the mayor, a few council members at the time, about finding a way to take some of these costs, especially the ones that were directed towards recreation, soccer, baseball, softball, where we're getting a lot of out-of-town and out-of-state users, and some way finding a way to put it into the general fund. Because the general fund with sales tax is paying for partially by those out-of-town and out-of-state users. Didn't get a lot of traction. So I do agree with Ms. Scott that we need to know more about where the water is going, who's getting free water, who's getting, and finding ways possibly to get some of these people or some of these organizations or the city or the county or the state or whoever it is to paying their fair share. Because what's happening is all of this water that is going out there for free is getting picked up by the ratepayer, by the user. You know, one of the things that I found interesting was we had made a suggestion to use more untreated water at that time. And one of the projects that we looked at cost a little bit too much to do, but it would have watered the Civic Center, Memorial Park, and that area down there. Well, if we would have done that project 6 years ago, it would be paid for by now, and all that water would be free. So even though we couldn't find the $700,000-800,000 at the time. So, you know, and it would have been a good Vision Fund project. I pushed it with Terry, our last Public Works Director, to try to get it on the Vision Fund, to get it as a Vision Fund project. But these things don't get traction. When you're talking about trying to find ways to save the taxpayers' money, it seems like it's harder to get traction than just raising rates. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, motion on the floor is for approval of item 66. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Okay, motion passes with 2 noes. Item 67, second reading, ordinance 6202, an ordinance to revise the rates, fees, and charges for city's sewer utility by amending Chapter 13.16 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take bullet number 2 is to approve the second reading of ordinance 6202.
Second.
Okay, a second by Lisa Modrick.
And if I may retain the floor?
Yes.
Mr. Kuhn, if you could, for us, please bring up slide number 12, or page 12 on your presentation. While Mr. Kuhn is pulling that up, we've got something very similar as far as the dotted line and the orange line, and this affects the sewer rates. Let you get to the right page. Thank you. And essentially, the lines, if I'm saying this correctly, Dan, please correct me if I'm not. Essentially, the lines are pretty similar to what we're seeing in the water rates. And the dotted line is the current rate, and if we go back 5 years, we see something very similar to the water rates. There was no increases there either. Am I stating that correctly first?
Yes, the last rate increase for water reclamation was also January 2013.
So the bottom line is that if we kind of, shall we say, go along with stretching it out over a number of years, we're going to run into the same problem with our wastewater treatment plant. And if I'm understanding correctly, we got some new EPA regulations coming down for the wastewater treatment plant, or potential new regulations coming down on the wastewater treatment plant, which is going to take a lot of money to get that added on to. Am I stating that correctly?
Yes, we anticipate changes to EPA and state regulations for discharge there within the next 7 to 12 years.
Thank you. And I think, if this is my opinion, is that if we don't get this rate increase now, gradually increase it over a period of time, and prevent that big, shall I dare say, a big bond in 7 to 10 years, or whatever the number happens to be, these gradual increases will help us avoid that big rate increase in the future. Am I stating that correctly?
There will be a bond required to meet those large capital improvements. How much they impact the rates, we don't know until the actual amount that we have to spend.
Thank you for that clarification. And then also, one more item is that there's a lot of confusion going on with this utility rate relief. I believe I was even stated or quoted within one of the news media that the rate relief was tied in with this ordinance. It is not. Am I correct on that?
Yes, the utility rate relief program has been in existence for 10 years.
Thank you. And I tried to clarify that with the news media so they could understand it was not, the rate relief was not part of this rate increase or rate utility rates that were going to be in effect. I'm going to leave it there, Mr. Kuhn, so if there's anything else we can come up with later on, I'll stand by. Thank you. I'll yield.
Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. I have my voice back. I won't take nearly as long this time. I'd just like to bring up a points for clarification. Number one, the resolution, the fees were moved to the resolution. So the City Council can bring forward and rediscuss those rates, those 5-year rates that the City Council passed. Clarification point, the City Council did pass that resolution in that 5-year rate schedule for both the water and the city's sewer utility 2 weeks ago. So that resolution was already passed. Point of clarification is item number 66, which we already voted on before, and item number 67. These are simply the ordinances that are clarifying the language and adopting the study and our methodology of how we are going to come up with these rate structures and setting our reserves going forward. So as far as the question of governance, the passing of ordinances, these two ordinances, 66 and 67, is just setting policy on these two. It's not setting the rate structure. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, the motion on the table is for approval of 67. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Okay, motion passes with 2 noes. Item number 68, second reading, ordinance number 6192, an ordinance to adopt the 2017 edition of the National Electrical Code and to amend local provisions by amending Chapter 15.16 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. Motion to approve by Laurenti and a second by Drury. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. One passes with 1 no. Item number 69. First reading, ordinance 6205, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by Spurlick Consulting Incorporated for Freeland Meadows LLC for a rezoning from general agricultural district to low density residential district for property generally described as being located southeast of the intersection of Merino Drive and Country Road.
Move to approve.
Okay, motion and a second by Nordstrom and Drew on that item. All in favor of approval of item 69, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. First reading, ordinance 6206, an ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. A request by KTM Design Solutions for Franklin Simpson for a rezoning from light industrial district to general commercial district for property generally described as being located northeast of the intersection of South Plaza Drive and Fountain Springs Drive. Motion to approve by Nordstrom, second by Solomon. All in favor of approval say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 71, first reading, ordinance 6207. An ordinance amending section 17.06 of chapter 17 of the Rapid City Municipal Code, a request by KTM Design Solutions Incorporated for Franklin Simpson for rezoning from general agricultural district to general commercial for property described as being located northeast of the intersection of South Plaza Drive and Fountain Springs Drive. Okay, motion to approve by Drew, and a second by, down here, was that Roberts? Roberts. Okay. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. 72, first reading, ordinance 6209, an ordinance regarding supplemental appropriation number 4 for 2017. Motion to approve by Scott, second by Nordstrom. We'll go to Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. May I ask Pauline a question?
Yes, please do.
Pauline, on our supplement that is linked, you have an item highlighted heavily and also a transfer statement at the bottom. Can you explain that to me, please?
I believe that's the $30,000 that we're asking to transfer from the general fund to the RSVP fund for the program for 2017. That is a partial year transfer. There will be another one at the end of the year because the donations aren't where they need to be, or grants.
And so that's the reference you make at the bottom, is that there will be another transfer. We don't know what that amount will be?
Not yet. We have 2 more months left, so we'll see at the end of, closer to the end of December.
And this is a general fund item because in 2017 we didn't have this particular fund in the budget, or this is just moving the fund over from the budget?
This was not budgeted as a supplement to the RSVP program in 2017 budget. The budget did show a shortfall in the approved budget. However, they were hopeful that they could get grants and donations that would meet the requirements to be fully funded. That did not happen.
So if it moves over to 2018 and we approved a 2018 budget for them, there's no way to designate that some of that funding that will be made up comes out of the 2018 budget?
If you as a council choose to supplement the RSVP program this year and direct me to not supplement the RSVP program next year, that is a decision that is up to you. I know there was conversation about this being a loan at one time, but in my opinion, the likelihood that that loan could be repaid is not likely.
So we're transferring and making good for what we saw coming and knew that a transfer was going to follow up in 2018, and we're just appropriating it out of the general fund.
No, 2018 is an additional $40,000 on top of everything that we will be transferring in 2017. We've been following it because we knew that the grant wasn't going to cover it. We knew that we were struggling getting foundational grants, and so we knew that it was coming. We just didn't know to what extent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, motion on the floor for item 72 is for approval. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 73, first reading, ordinance 6210, an ordinance to amend chapter 5.60 of the Rapid City Municipal Code to adopt provisions governing transportation network companies and to amend taxi cab ordinances. We'll go to Jason Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I move to approve. If I can get a second, hold the floor.
Yes, and the second was Laurenti. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just a few things. First of all, I would just say this ordinance is a win for Rapid City. It's a win because for a variety of reasons. One, for public safety. Obviously, we have reductions, potentials in drinking and driving. We have all sorts of, I guess, less drinking and driving too. This helps fill the gaps in our transportation network that we might have. 3, a little side income for folks in Rapid City. And it's one of those things that a lot of folks, especially millennials and travelers and visitors to our area, expect, and now that we can have that here. And so I appreciate the council supporting this. One thing I wanted to do was give a thank you to the city staff for working quickly on this, as LIP announced that they were intending to operate in South Dakota, and Rapid City reacted very quickly. So Carl Cushman and Joe Landine in the city attorney's office, Pauline, the mayor, police chief, and everybody else for acting swiftly. And also I just want to give a thank you to the city of Sioux Falls for helping us. They already had ordinances in place, so we were able to use some of their language and modify it for Rapid City. And I think that shows what happens when two communities can collaborate and work together. It's a win for everybody involved. And so I just wanted to give a thank you to everybody, urge support for this ordinance, and I'll yield the floor for now. Thank you.
Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. This question will be, Joel, do you want me to bring it up with Carla or throw it out to you first? Okay, if I can speak to Joel on this, Mayor?
Yes.
So in this writing, we do have, we have stricken several paragraphs throughout it, and it includes suspension, revocation, the appealing process, I think is the simplest way for me to say that. And I just want to understand what avenue of appeal does a taxi cab, because this is an ordinance for TNC and cabs, will they have if in fact they have a conflict in their application? Do they have now no denial process before the city council by the strike?
No. I think what, Carla can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe what she did is move that to a provision in the front, or in the first section, and then it applies to both the taxis and the transportation network companies. So instead of having an appeal provision in each one, she put one appeal provision for both.
So both the Lyft or Uber driver has an appeal process above and beyond their company, the TNC company, or does it go through TNC while we're separating these out and then putting that in there? So just sometimes we have a taxi cab driver come before us, not the company.
There's two different regulations. One's, they're not intermixed. There's regulations for taxis and there's regulations for transportation network companies. And then there are some administrative provisions that are for, do you want to?
So when they bring the appeal before the council, it would be the driver of either TNC and or the taxi cab company?
Well, first, drivers of TNCs are not licensed by the city.
That's what I wanted to get out of that. So then there is no appeal process under the TNC at all.
We don't license them. I don't know what you mean. There's not, they aren't licensed. The TNC is licensed. The driver is not. If there is a problem with the driver, it is up to the TNC to deal with the problem with the driver. We wouldn't get involved unless there was a lot of problems. Then the citizen or customer could come to us, and then we would take a look at the TNC license to see if they were, say, the allegation were that they were not dealing with driver complaints. Let's say they had a specific driver that had a lot of complaints and they weren't dealing with it, then we would look at their license. So there's a lot of incentive for the TNC company to police themselves, but that's how it's structured. That's way, you know, really, TNCs are already authorized by the state, and they deal with that. One of their big issues is that they don't want the driver's license because these are people that do this part-time or just in their free time, and they don't want to deal with the regulation. So their model doesn't work if you require licensing, and they've resisted that. So the state conceded that, and so they are responsible for the backgrounds and all that and the insurance through state law. So state law protects everyone statewide. Now, just like there may be some rules for taxis or whatever, but traditionally larger communities still do additional regulations on top of that. So what we're doing is consistent with that. And basically what we did in order, because they were ready to launch and have launched in South Dakota, we essentially adopted Sioux Falls' ordinance because they had already reviewed that and agreed to it and were okay with it. So that was the quickest way to get it going, and it appeared to protect the public interest.
Where does the public interest go then if they do have a complaint? Do they go to the state?
Well, they go to the company, but since we'll be licensing them if the company is not, but again, we aren't going to pull somebody's license because they have a dissatisfied person. I mean, somebody may call the company and say, you need to do this with this driver, and the company may investigate and say, no, we don't, and then they'll probably come to us and say, oh, you need to pull their license. Well, that's probably not going to happen. But if you get 20 or 30 of the same complaints on the same thing, what this ordinance does is give us the ability then
to address that through their license.
Okay, thank you.
Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to be supporting this ordinance. One of the major reasons why I'm supporting this, because we're looking in the long range, and our metropolitan organization is for long-range transportation, and car sharing fits into one of the categories that we can possibly do with using Lyft as an example. If Uber comes in line with us, then we could possibly use car sharing in the long-range transportation as well. So a couple of major reasons why I'm supporting this ordinance. It'll fit in with the long-range planning.
Okay, thank you. Chad Lewis.
I think, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to welcome Rapid City to the 21st century and thank Jason Sullivan for his work on this particular item, and say, you know, it's obviously the way for the future, this and Airbnb and everything else is out there, folks. It's no point in trying to stop it. It's a huge benefit to the community. I think it'll help a lot with some of the DUI problems and all the other problems. Yeah, parking, you know, cost of gas, everything else. Roads, wear and tear, it's just a beautiful idea, and I'm glad we're finally adopting it. I once again applaud Mr. Sullivan for doing that and reaching out and helping out with our sister city in Sioux Falls. We actually worked together for once, all right. So this is in obviously the lawyer's attorney's office, excuse me, for their work on it as well. So just want to make sure that the proper people got credit for it. Thank you.
Darla Drew.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll make this quick. I am going to support this also. I think it's a great way of looking at the shared economy that millennials are really spearheading, and that goes along with the Airbnb, the food co-ops, and now we have Lyft. So I'm really glad to see this happen. I've had constituents contact me about it, and so supporting this. So of course I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Okay, the motion on the floor for 73 is for approval. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And to echo what Jason Solomon said, we really owe a debt of gratitude to Sioux Falls for doing all the work for us in this case, and especially all the city council, but especially Councilperson Christine Erickson, who, by the way, is a Rapid City native, and Mayor Mike Huther for all of the work. So now we are on to item 74, and we'll go to our Public Works Chairperson, Darla Drew. Huh? We voted on 73.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
I know, but didn't vote.
Yeah?
Yes, we did.
Voted?
We just voted.
I'm totally in control.
Slap her a little bit.
Okay. Item 74, a request by Spurlock Consulting, Inc. for Freeland Meadows, LLC for a preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lots 1 through 4 of Block 1, lots 1 through 10 of Block 2, lots 1 through 11 of Block 3 of Prairie Meadows South Subdivision, generally described as being located southeast of the intersection of Merino Drive and Country Road. Move to approve.
A second by Richie Nordstrom. Okay. All in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carries.
Item 75, a request by KTM Design Solutions, Inc. for Franklin Simpson for a preliminary subdivision plan for proposed lots 2A and 2R of Fountain Springs Square subdivision, generally described as being located northeast of the intersection of South Plaza Drive and Fountain Springs Drive.
Move to approve.
Oh, yeah, move to approve. What are you trying to say to me here? Move to approve with stipulations. Thank you.
Second.
Okay, motion to approve with stipulation, second by Nordstrom. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And now on to our Legal and Finance Committee item. We'll go to Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 76 is the audit report of the City of Rapid City 2015 Financial and Compliance Report. I make a motion to approve.
Okay, second by Chad Lewis. All in favor of approval, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Back to Public Works Committee items. Darla Drew.
Item number 77, at request of the applicant, he requests to, or she, requests this item to be continued to November 20th.
Second.
Okay, motion by Lewis and second by Nordstrom. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Okay, now, on to the alcoholic beverage license applications, items 78 through 182. I have got the head nod from the police chief that there are no hang-ups in any of these items, so I believe it's appropriate to take all of them as one unless council has an objection. And we're going to take them all as one on the motion of Steve Laurenti and the second of John Roberts. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. 78 through 182 are approved. On to item 183 under staff items, update on James Bialotta Jr. assessment. Authorize staff to write off invoice number 309 in the amount of $402. Motion to approve by Drew and a second by Drury. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now public hearing items, items 184 through 188. We have no need for a public hearing for those items. Consent public hearing items 184 through 186. Would the council like to approve these items or take them separately? Second. Motion by Scott, second by Nordstrom to take 184 through 186. And that was a motion for approval. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That's the end of the consent public hearing. Non-consent public hearing items 187. Appeal of Planning Commission's decision on request by Verdell Brand for a final plan development overlay to allow an oversized garage for property generally described as being located at 2726 West Omaha Street. And committee recommendation was to approve with stipulations. Appeal of Planning Commission's decision to approve with stipulations. Lisa Modrick.
Thank you, Mayor. I can probably help with that approve with stipulation. The stipulation portion of it was to add a 50-foot concrete into that driveway, and in that neighborhood it doesn't support concrete driveways. He has done every checklist that had been provided to him in order to meet the stipulations for the carport, and the problem that he's having now is to suddenly come back and have to have the concrete driveway added in. And if you go out to the neighborhood, or if you look at the pictures that were supplied, you're going to see that these are the strip line driveways, or they're gravel driveways, all the way except for a new house that was made. So I feel confident that we should be able to approve this appeal request, appealing the driveway portion of it, and allow that carport to go through, which is approved by the Planning Commission, and the decision for the driveway is to us. And that would be my recommendation, is that we allow this to go forward as is, without the concrete driveway. Is Mr. Podell here? Is he here? That's what I thought. Could you mind if I ask him a question?
Go ahead.
Thank you. We've talked, and you might be able to clean that up a little bit better, but you've done all the process, and I just want you to share with the council short. We've only got moments here, but if you could do a short story on this for us.
Okay. On how this all came about, you mean, I come to apply for a building permit, and they said, well, I had too much coverage, that if I would tear down a shed, and it was a large shed, that then it would be okay. And so I tore that shed down, and not only did I tear that one down, I tore another one down, and then I went and asked for a building permit. And he says, well, you know that you're going to put concrete underneath of the carport. So, well, you know, you didn't tell me that, but then I said, okay, I would do that. And then he says, well, now you're going to have to put 50 feet of driveway in. And I said, I'm going to end up having $20,000 in a carport that this is property that I do for low-income housing, and I can afford $20,000. I mean, and I would have to pass the cost on to my renters, you know, and I just felt like I was misled on what it would take to get that building permit.
So I think, Mr. Brand, where we're at now is you've met all of the requested requirements. You're ready to build this carport.
I would agree to put all new gravel in, and if I did put a 50-foot driveway in, it would still be 40 foot from the carport.
And that's what the pictures show.
Right.
It shows exactly that. So it really won't reduce dust because the rest of the neighborhood is that way, and you don't have a dust problem. We talked about that already. I foresee, I can certainly support, there was a motion that he's allowed to proceed forward with what already the Planning Commission has given him, which is permission to do the carport. He's met that obligation, and to allow it to stand just as the carport without requiring any additional concrete on a driveway with a 40-foot donut in the middle of it. So that would be my recommendation, but we'll see where the council goes on this. Thank you, Mr. Brand.
Becky Drury.
Thank you, Mayor. I received a call from Mr. Brandt, and I drove that neighborhood, and there is, typically, I don't vote for variances. I vote, if that's what the ordinance says, you do what the ordinance says. But I drove that neighborhood, and I can see no reason to make him pour concrete. And a dust problem, seriously, he lives over by the cement plant, and which is one of the reasons why I wanted the carport in the first place. So I would hope we would support his request. I yield. Thank you.
Okay. Amanda Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. And may I ask Mr. Ken Young a couple questions concerning the recommendation from staff?
Please do.
Thank you. So, Mr. Young, and I did ask you because I was trying to remind myself, because I did stream the Planning Commission meeting, and I remember this coming before the Planning Commission meeting, but it was staff's recommendation to the Planning Commissioners to go ahead and approve this with the stipulation to put in this concrete or asphalt drive. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And could it be either concrete or asphalt? It didn't really matter, or was it one or the other?
It could be either.
Either one, so as long as it was improved.
Impervious pavement, yes.
And the reason that staff was making this recommendation to the Planning Commission, what was the justification? With all the other neighbors not having this done, what was the justification that when new construction or a new building is done out in this area, why would staff recommend to go ahead and make the improvements? And basically, this would go for anybody out in that neighborhood that were going to put up a new garage or extend a garage or make any type of property improvement. Isn't that right?
That's correct. What we really need to do is go back and ask ourselves, what is the main reason why we require this in the first place, even with new development? And so we have our road right-of-ways that are developed to a certain standard, and we do require paved access onto that for any new development. And the reason for that is that we don't want to track in gravel and other types of debris and materials from a property that can ultimately lessen the stability of that roadway. And so there are reasons why we require that. Acknowledging that we do have a neighborhood that does not have this by and large. However, our only opportunity as a city to bring our standards up throughout the city is when properties propose to improve themselves. And when they improve themselves, that's when we require that we meet our current code. And so even though this would be a property that stands out on its own with this requirement at this time, as down the road into the future neighboring properties improve, then we have the opportunity to also make that requirement of them, so that ultimately the goal is that all of our properties will have this type of improvement onto the streets.
Thank you, Mr. Young. And then finally, because I know the City Council has wrestled with the idea of sidewalks, and granted, this driveway, whether it's asphalt and concrete, doesn't fall into the same category as the public walking on a sidewalk, because that's public right-of-way, this is private. Does the City Council have any ability to order in a driveway if all of a sudden the majority of the driveways in that area are improved? And the reason I ask is you made the statement, the only way that we can start improving that is when a property owner decides to improve the existing property. Then the city can try to make an argument for bringing the piece of property into compliance with what our requirements are.
I believe this is the only proper method that the city has to actually require that and bring us up to that standard.
Thank you. So I know the City Council a lot of times, based on the neighborhood and based on an individual's consideration, that's why the appeal is brought to us, is so that we can consider it. But in considering it, I'd just like to make sure that both sides are aired. So if the City Council as a whole approves to grant the appeal per the property owner, just recognize that we're going against our own requirements of what we want to do and where we want to take the city, and we cannot order in this driveway later on. It's going to have to be then readdressed when another improvement 50 years or 100 years from now is made to this property. So, you know, as I stand right now, since this is a public hearing, I'm not really sure which way I'm going to vote, because I generally like to support the progression of our city, but I have a hard time penalizing one property owner out there when the majority of the neighborhood is still gravel sidewalks. So I'll wait and listen to the rest of my constituents up here. Thank you.
Darla Drew.
I move to uphold the appeal of the Planning Commission's decision without the requirement of a concrete driveway.
I'll second.
Are you voting to override the Planning Commission's decision?
The appeal.
No, he's appealing. So are you
Right, I'm siding with him, yes. I'm
Okay.
upholding his appeal.
So
Yeah.
let's call it this. I hate the way these are all worded. Let's call it this. In support of the allowing the property owner to build without a driveway, we'll call that overriding the Planning Commission's decision. If you want to uphold the Planning Commission decision, then he'll be required to build the driveway. Is that clear? So the motion was from Darla Drew, and that was to override the Planning Commission decision and let the carport be built without a driveway. And the second was Richie Nordstrom. Yeah, okay. Are we clear? Everyone clear? Yes. All right. Jason Solomon.
I will support that motion and support Mr. Brand on this. I think he's done everything the city has asked him to do, and it just seemed like one other thing had to come along. And I think we have to be very cautious of our appeals, and we should be thoughtful of them. It shouldn't be automatic just because we feel sorry for someone. But I think in this case, it's reasonable to grant this waiver for a variety of reasons: the neighborhood, the air quality due to the cement plant being nearby, and the dust, debris, and everything else that comes along. And the fact that you've been very cooperative up to this point, getting rid of 2 sheds, and if the threshold needed to be a little bit greater for me than a carport. If you were doing a big addition to your house or something along those lines, maybe that would be a different story. But I feel like it's reasonable to grant this exception, which is what it is, and so I'll be supporting the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be supporting this too. I think that you know, forcing you into doing something like this can be a little financially, you know, it can be difficult. But I do want to remind this council that just recently we forced a whole subdivision into upgrading, even though the rest of the subdivision wasn't. So we got to be very careful on what we do and who we pick and who we choose and who we don't. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to override the Planning Commission's decision and therefore approve the appeal. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion passes with 1 no. All right, now on to the item 188, the bill list. The bill list for November 6, 2017, will go to Pauline Sumption, Finance Officer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no additions to the bill list, so the total is that which is attached at $8,227,061.90.
Motion to approve by Laurenti, second by Nordstrom. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Move to go into executive session.
Okay, there is a need to go into executive session pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2, subsection 3. We have a motion to go into executive session by Jason Solomon and a second by Amanda Scott. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are in executive session.
executive session.
Okay, we're back, and we have a motion to come out of executive session from Chad Lewis and a second by Richie Nordstrom. Is there any action required of executive session?
No.
Okay, staff says no.
Move to adjourn.
So we have a motion to adjourn by Lewis and a second by Roberts. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.